Have you noticed how loud and polarized our world has become? Almost like there's just nothing you can say that won't start a fight. Well, today we're going to be talking with Deborah Eden Tull about her new book, Luminous Darkness, and how it's time to turn toward rather than away from the darkness within, and to learn to perceive with our hearts beyond the unconscious bias and the hierarchical perception. Let the darkness unite us all. Tune in to find out more.
Soul Nectar Show, the Soul Nectar Show. You're invited, delighted to discover who you are. Anything is possible if you believe. So join us on this beautiful journey. Soul Nectar Show, Soul Nectar Show.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to Soul Nectar Show, that show where we talk about all things essence, where we gather around the campfire and we share our stories of connection to that which is greater than us, to the big mystery beyond the veil, to those synchronistic moments that lead us inexorably towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world that we live in. I'm your host, Carrie Hummingbird, and you know I love these conversations week after week, and I love to invite guests on to illuminate different aspects of our world and ourselves and our subconscious and this experience that we're all muddling our way through. And this week I feel super tender just in the presence of this beloved human we'll be talking with today. I feel a lot of tenderness in this space, especially with what I've been witnessing and experiencing in social media over the last week. Has been really touching and also provocative. And I've been watching myself as I go through learning how to express myself. And as I mentioned to our guest before the show, learning to express myself with love and compassion in a world that shouts. How can I be heard? How can I make an impact, an influence in a world that is so geared towards, the dial of the volume is on 10, and I'd like to speak from 4, and I'd like to be heard at 4 instead of having to join the cacophony at 10 in order to have my voice contributed to the conversation. And does my voice even need to be contributed to the conversation is the other aspect of that question, because then I start to question, do I even need to show up? Is that even important? Do I just stay in the darkness, shining my light and sending prayers in the middle of the night? Is that my total purpose? And so we are going to have a beautiful conversation today. Today's guest is Deborah Eden Tull. She's the author of Luminous Darkness, this amazing book that I completely recommend that you go out instantly and get and start reading, because it's very, very touching, very beautiful, deep, rich conversation inside this book. And this wonderful person who wrote it is here with us. She's the founder of the nonprofit Mindful Living Revolution. She's a Zen meditation mindfulness teacher, author, spiritual activist. And she spent 7 years as a monastic in a silent Zen monastery. Imagine that, in silence. Wow. And so we've been really talking before we got started about what kind of conversation we're going to have today. I want you to hear her story of how she came to the awarenesses that she expresses in her book about compassionate awareness, non-duality, mindful inquiry, and that unwavering commitment to personal transformation. This conversation will weave the darkness and the light together. So don't be shy, everybody. Join us as we introduce to the conversation Eden, for short. Eden, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for welcoming me so warmly, Carrie, and thank you to the presence of everyone who is gathered with us energetically, who is listening to this, knowing that we're all here, weaving personal and collective transformation. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think your press agent probably reached out to me with your book, and a lot of times I say no to those things, but for some reason I said yes. And I got a copy of your magnificent book, and it just really has touched me. I've actually, as I mentioned to you, I've read the first half of it twice now, and I don't want to rush it. I want to take my time with it, which is something you actually recommend. But tell us a little bit about yourself for people who don't know about you. How did your journey unfold to get to the place where you wrote this book, just in a synopsis? Just kind of give us a brief view. And then let's dive in wherever you're feeling called to share.
Sure. Okay. I will first offer that the book Luminous Darkness, the bulk of it was written during the pandemic, and it was an extraordinary way, an extraordinary synchronistic timing to have taken on this project, which really came to me as a calling, which any book I've written has come to me. It takes a lot to write a book, a lot of courage, a lot of willingness. So we don't take these projects on casually, but when we are called. And something about spending that time when the world was in so much uncertainty, unknown, flux, and change, which it still is today in different form, but where, in a sense, a kind of darkness had descended, even simply through the metaphor of darkness as absolute uncertainty. And to recognize that I had been given the instruction, starting really a few years prior, to recognize that in my path throughout my life, darkness has been my greatest teacher. There's so much emphasis in modern spiritual circles to get to the light, to focus on the light, to hold, as is a very common and historical pattern in human consciousness, light as superior to dark, rather than to look much deeper, to sense and see clearly what darkness actually is, and to recognize the full spectrum of light and dark as our teachers, as our consciousness, as the wisdom bodies that we work with here. And so there were many things that inspired me to dive into that process. But one I would say was a mystical experience in which I simply, in the dark of night at about midnight while I was leading a retreat, and we enter deep states of consciousness, leading and practicing on retreat. We enter altered states of consciousness. This is not outside of the ordinary. The mystical is very deeply aligned with our ordinary everyday life when we are awake to a certain degree, and when we're awake to a quality of deep embodied listening that is very much the foundation of the book and of my work, that goes beyond just listening to the human world, to listening to the beyond the human world and to the invisible world. And so in that experience, I had a conversation with darkness that really left me when I woke up in the morning with about a 3-week journey of something that needed to be integrated and digested and recognized. And also, the last thing I'll say before I go into something that you shared already today is that in the book, there are so many layers explored, and darkness can be explored physically. The medicine of darkness in nature and consciousness, the restorative darkness of the night, the receptivity of the yin aspect of darkness in nature rather than the yang, brightly lit, loud, turn up the volume, hurry, produce, get things done kind of world of capitalism, to a much more metaphorical understanding of darkness as the great mystery itself, and how much fear of the unknown and the mystery there is in human consciousness. So how we kind of lean into binary perception as a safer place to dwell. But the last thing I want to say about that is also the level of recognizing how many spiritual traditions throughout history across the globe have especially animistic traditions, which do not hold human communication and consciousness as superior to other forms of life, have recognized the consciousness itself that darkness carries as an extraordinary guide and teacher. And so what happens when we allow ourselves to drop, first to investigate, and then to say, how silly is this? How much harm is this duality between light and dark, which holds light as superior, creating so much harm? And then what is the actual invitation of darkness? So I'm going to pause there. That gives a little introduction to the book.
Yeah, I love it. That's a really accurate description. And from the audience, that conversation, those layers of those conversation explore other topics that you know that I've been really passionate about, such as the color ladder and dismantling that and stopping seeing things in some kind of hierarchical value system. And yeah, I mean, it's just powerful. And I wanted to also say that as I was reading your book, I was reminded of one of my first teachers, who also, Heather Ashamar, who also taught me to go inside, like go inside, close your eyes, put your hand over your heart, hand over your belly, hold yourself and just go in. And every time that I practice that, I feel better. Like it's like, okay, I'm in here with me and all is well. Like no matter what's going on out here, I can't control that, but I can come in here for like what you were talking about, that nurturing and like tuning out my eyesight, which is so tuned into that polarity world, right? Which is trained in that system of duality, in that conditioned world. I can come in and tune to this like inner sight, which has color and texture and light and everything inside of it too, but it's just coming from a different place, which is the space I tune into when I do healings. So yeah, thank you so much for that.
So just reflecting what you just shared, the invitation, even by resting our eyes, closing our eyes, relaxing into a soft, spacious gaze instead of the kind of single pointed vision that's connected to binary perception, labeling everything we see as good, bad, better, worse, higher, lower. We come home to the refuge within, and we also are able to live more from center, anchored within, anchored upon the earth, and then meeting the world at large from a different quality of consciousness. So that said, you said something really potent at the start of the call about looking at your relationship to expression and noticing the desire to both have freedom from the expectation that we all show up volume 10 in a world where there's kind of an obsession with loud expression and the yang rather than the yin. And our voice is always, we're always supposed to have an opinion on things or that kind of thing. How do you maybe have the freedom to turn it down to a 4 or to find your own authentic voice? And just today, every Tuesday, my Sangha meets online, the Fierce Compassion Sangha, and we were having a similar exploration of how we can, through presence, through meditation, which I consider as a way of life, not just something we do on the cushion, dropping into a quality of deep embodied listening, again, as the way we do everything, that it starts with receptivity. It starts with us protecting this field of deep listening with in and out, without which we get disconnected to both our own inner voice, our truth, our subtle body, and also disconnected to the entire realm of communication that is our cosmos. Mostly what happens when we're not in receptivity, when we're not deep listening, is we're shallow listening instead. I'm raising my hand to the top of my head to just the superficial voices, narrative of separate self, familiar stories that kind of make up I, me, my separate self identity. In my life and as a young person, that was a place of great suffering. That was a place that wasn't fun to be me. Life got a lot more fun, a lot more free, and a lot more peaceful when I took on deep listening, which is meditation practice, as a way of being. So that's one of the foundational teachings of darkness, really starting with our receptivity.
And I feel like that's what a lot of the masters of the past turn to, is that inner space. and would spend years and years, at the top of the mountain in inner contemplation or inner reflection in that darkness. But we're not really called to be totally there, right? We're called to be in motion. And so it's like Bruce Lee says that it's not really martial arts until you can be stillness in motion. So both and I feel like we're learning how to do that now. But I still want to retreat to the mountain. Like there's times when it gets like this that I want to disengage and leave. And but that's not powerful either.
Well, but here's what is powerful is remembering and knowing yourself as the mountain and knowing that there is a way when we need to, when we recognize I'm getting too pulled outside of myself into the external. And I mean self in capital S there, not separate self, but interconnected self. I'm getting depleted by how much I'm being of service. I'm whatever it is, getting distracted. There is a way that we need to recognize when it's time to drop more into the yin, the restorative. In every single breath, there is a complete rest available to us. It's called the exhalation. But when we're not paying attention, many people are not even aware of sort of weaving rest or restoration as more of a way of being into and through all of their doing. So I don't encourage anyone to overvalue going off to the cave or the monastery as the place of practice. The world as it is, the everyday world most people are living in, is a perfect place to feed collective awakening. But we do need to take our own measure and know deeply how to engage in restoration as a way of being. Otherwise, there will be depletion. And just to be clear, I'm not in any way, when I talk about turning within, encouraging spiritual bypassing, which means turning within to avoid. Good luck. You can try it, but it's not going to actually feel satisfying or healing. Turning within as a way of finding your center and recognizing what and who you really are from that place of undeniable interconnection. We have more of a clarity with which to engage skillfully with the world we're living in. So I teach sacred activism, people doing extraordinary work in the world, if that's their calling. And to do so from center is really different than doing so from that surface listening, right?
Yeah. And I just to give my own reflection on that from what I feel in my body is that, let's say I've been looking at a lot of social media and I recognize I'm in the big self, like that self that's way bigger than me. And it's like, okay, I need to come back and tune into this being right here. And when I find I go inside, it feels like the whole world is like spinning around. Like there's just so much moving and so much stirred up and so much that, I mean, thoughts that want to come through and feelings. And then, I mean, it's just so much content that I need to just be still and let it integrate, settle, work itself out. I mean, I use tobacco, so I'll be like tobacco myself and go, okay, I just need to be still now because I don't know how to process all of that I just took in to my body and to my mind and my beingness, and it's a lot. I couldn't even respond if I wanted to because it's so much.
Yes. I think the statistic is that someone today takes in as much information in one day as a whole year of life for someone living in the United States in 1800. Like it's a ton of information. And so, yes, resting in the pause, that's an expression of what I call endarkenment, integrating, metabolizing our experience, living a more restorative existence so that we can be of service and of conscious response, a relational presence, a responsive presence in the world. And I would offer that what you were describing is sometimes coming home to yourself, and it's so much moving and shifting and stimulating. It's helpful for me to remember that there's all that is arising and passing, all of the happenings and our emotions and sensations in our body and all of it. And then there's a larger field, the medium through which it is all arising and passing. That is awareness itself or consciousness. That is also metaphorically darkness. All of light arises from darkness. And every idea, every vision, all creativity, everything that comes through us arises from the unknown, the darkness. So to have a committed, sort of more intentional relationship to that balance of light and dark in our life is a gift to ourselves and to our world. It really is. It's also an honoring of nature, an honoring of the Tao, an honoring of life. Yeah.
Yeah, and it does feel like there's this way that becoming conscious of the collective themes and then digesting it, integrating it in our own being is also supporting a shift in consciousness, even if there wasn't maybe a specific voice given to it or a message put out there, that there is a way that it is transformative to be in witness of it and process it in the individual body, feels like. And then how to reconcile that with the part of us that wants to be active, right? That feels like a need to take an action, not to sit back and be the silent majority, but to actually put our voices forth to create a new conversation and a new dialogue and a new kind of understanding, right, in the collective that would actually affect us physically, in our lives living in a house in the United States.
Yes. So I hear you talking first about the powerful motion of turning towards rather than away, turning towards. And when we turn towards and bear witness to what is happening in our world and give ourselves space and time to truly be compassionate witnesses, that is powerful in itself. That is valuable in itself. And that actually, if we don't, harm is caused because there will be unconscious awareness of all that is going on, but it won't be metabolized in us. Then I believe only once we've turned towards and have really bared witness, then we can ask ourselves, is there a compassionate response? Is there a skillful response that wants to authentically come through me? Is there a communication that needs to happen? Is there a way I need to use my voice? Is there a way I'm called to take a risk on behalf of the greater good? Whatever it is. But that, again, that response, if it's going to be skillful, it comes from a receptivity, a turning towards and being with first. Does that mirror your own experience?
I guess yes, and yes, absolutely. And it begs another question, which is, we are often have heard the message that in order to be effective, we've got to listen to where others are coming from, right? So we've got to understand the whole context of the conversation and then meet people where they're at. So if they're at 10 or 11 in volume, like how do you meet somebody where they're at? Because if you're not really feeling called to be that, then are you even making a difference?
So a couple ways. And the first response coming up for me when I hear you say that is, for me, the deeper we go in presence, we recognize the unshakable power of presence. If someone's at a 10 and we're aware of that through our listening, the energy needed to meet them fully or to meet that situation fully comes from the quality of our presence. In other words, it doesn't have to come from dialing our voice up to a 10 or dialing ourselves up to a hyper capacity if we feel that they're hyper or urgent. It comes from how much of a badass presence, grounded, anchored, fully here, awake, generous, open heart, strong back. From that place, authentic voice comes through us. If it's a gentle, soft voice, okay, but it's coming through a powerful presence. If it's a speedy voice, okay. But I want to point out the potency of presence first. And then I'll share that part of the reason that I teach spiritual activism, or embodied change making is another term we sometimes use, because there are so many people, good intentions to get out there and do something, but that have quickly been led to burnout or cause more harm in their intentions because they weren't present and centered, or whatever it is. I come from a family, a very long line of activist and artist, and I have witnessed firsthand for a long time what can happen with burnout, what can happen with reactivity and finger pointing. I think I used to be a reactive finger pointing activist
I've
myself.
done my share of that, yes.
Before I asked, is this really of the depth of service that my heart is here for? Is this really impacting the change I want to see and be part of here that really ignites me? And so there is another way, and it comes from valuing not just what we do, but how we do what we do. And before we pause there, I'll just share a fundamental, foundational, but I think revolutionary teaching from Zen is how we do anything is how we do everything. And also, it's not what we do, it's how we do it. So learning that merge of bringing much more awareness to the ripple effect with everything we do, with all of our thoughts and actions. They ripple out when we are aware of interdependence as the domain of existence. We recognize this, and it actually becomes empowering. It also holds us accountable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And also in your book, you were talking about the total self, right? So that presence is in the complete self. And you talked about your discovery of your angry self, the one that I think it was Electra, really angry and just mad and wanted to express that. And so, like, part of really coming into presence is embracing all of us, not shunning some parts because it's not, it's not sunshiny, and it's not pretty, and it's not, what we think we're supposed to be in order to be out there and be effective. It's like this other side of us that actually has a lot of power, right? This part that has a lot of power that we can tap into as long as we can maybe integrate. Talk a little bit about that process.
Yes, this is so important. I love shadow work, and the book talks a lot about the importance of what we call shadow work. Shadows, very simply, as those aspects of ourself, of our being, that we might tend to push away or judge or think of as incoherent with our identity or how we wish to be seen. So you pointed to a story I shared in chapter 3, which is a chapter on fierce compassion, the mother of endarkenment. And I talked about moving to the silent monastery at age 26 and having this expectation, maybe I'll just drop into this peaceful place that I'm projecting onto monasticism and Buddhism. And instead, I met Electra really quickly, this rageful, angry, irritated, really upset part of me, and recognized, oh my gosh, how humbling. I think maybe this energy's been with me for a long time, and I've always denied it. I've been like Eden, who's pleasant and easy to be around. And, I was 26 and I hadn't done that work yet. And at first felt shame and presenced it with my teacher and was instructed to acknowledge that this was my time and chance to get to know Electra, to, in my body and my being, really be open to, with curiosity, what is this energy? And what's the power of this energy? And what does this energy want to express? And with complete neutrality, instead of labeling anger dark or bad or unwanted, which many of us get conditioned to think of anger as, okay? Instead of another form of energy, of emotion, energy and motion that comes through us. I think part of the bind we're in as a species right now is that there has been so much unskillful use of fire energy and so little modeling through real embodiment of how to own fire energy and wield it, use it in healthy, loving ways. So the more that I embraced Electra, the more I became a truly passionate person, a truly courageous person, someone who's really willing to take risks that I hadn't been willing to take before. I became so much more joyfully alive by embracing that which I had pushed away. And that helped to carve the path for every other shadow that I then needed to meet. How about let's lean into jealousy and envy. That's really
That's a
under
good
there.
one.
Let's lean into whatever else I've pushed away. I share with humor sort of a story of how growing up with a mom who's an extraordinary activist, but also I laugh is like the loudest woman in the world, like a really volume 10 voice. And I was more of a sort of yin, gentle. I, for a period of time, because I saw how others reacted in such a judgmental, binary mind culture to loudness and to an unreasonable woman, right? I learned to be more quiet, and I even moved to a silent monastery. And there was a period of time that I had to go through a journey of recognizing by cutting that part of me off. I had cut off one half of my existence, and actually the potency or freedom of being able to respond to the moment. When is silence the response? When is volume 10 voice the response? When is volume 3 the response? But freedom is to be able to let the instrument of one's body and being express fully in response to life, right?
Yeah, to answer my question, I had a similar story told to me by my mentor I mentioned about that. And I just hadn't really fully integrated that yet. You know, it's like I have a mother who's super feisty and is volume 10, you know, like because she's got a lot of opinions and she'll express all of them. And I love my mother to pieces. And I can now finally be around my mother because I have integrated some of that fire medicine. But I feel like I'm still in the process of figuring out, and maybe we all are collectively, I don't know, figuring out how to work with that fire to bring it forward in a way that transmutes, transforms, alchemizes, purifies. And as a healer, it's interesting because a lot of times people, and I think also as a woman, a lot of times people have these expectations that women will be quiet and demure and go along and all of this. And that could make me not want to be that way, you know, because then I'm like my mom, I'm like, forget that, you know, no, that's not going to happen. But there's like, as a healer, there's this idea, and I had somebody call it out on social media who's worked with me before, and she's like, "You're a healer. You're not supposed to trigger people." And I was like, "Healers trigger people like literally all the time. It's not my intention to trigger people, but it's like the energy of being a healer and the awareness that we have." That is going to cause awareness. And sometimes people call that being triggered, you know, is when they become aware of something, you know, that they don't like about themselves.
So, yeah, this is so. And I would offer that part of that freedom I was talking about is about full spectrum leadership, inviting our whole selves into our leadership. This is something to guide others in as well. Not the idea of how a healer or leader or teacher should be, but our whole self. So I work with both gentle and fierce compassion. On one side, the metaphor of the soft, open hand, our receptivity, just listening to, being with subtle energy, that aspect of healing. On the other side, in Buddhism, Manjushri sword, which cuts through delusion, the fierce compassion required to speak out on behalf of truth, to show up wholeheartedly, even when it is so challenging. This balance, we learn that we can show up to both with love, that love expresses in a whole spectrum of light and dark, of yin and yang, not one or the other, but it requires skillfulness to know how to embody those. Yeah.
And I think the skillfulness has to do with self awareness especially if you're an emotional processor in human design, of knowing where on the wave am I? Am I back to neutral or am I still on the wave? That part I'm still discerning sometimes. It's like sometimes I think I'm past it because I'm not in the moment of intensity, but actually there's more happening under the surface that if I allowed it to process and integrate more, there would be a clarification, there would be a higher truth and coming forward to express than the one that I'm able to access in the middle of the emotional wave.
Yes, yeah, I appreciate what you just shared, and also just appreciate the transparency with which we can say, I'm in the learning process of something, and I totally embrace and meet with compassion that learning process. And it's exhausting, some expectation that we're all supposed to be uh, masters, or that we need to judge ourselves until we failed, until we've sort of met this pinnacle of perfection with something that we're learning. None of that is helpful. That's part of hierarchical perception. Part of why I wrote the book, Luminous Darkness, is really to look deeply at, in a sense, how much in a trance of hierarchical perception human consciousness has become, and that it's easier than we think to unhook from that, because it is not our true nature. It is not what we speak of in Buddhism as original consciousness, or the return to source that meditation is, that being who we really are is. There's a quality of seeing with the heart that is natural for us. It's like seeing just underneath all the labels, the perception that sees in wholeness life, just beneath all the labels that we've been trained to give things.
Yeah, I love that you just said that. And it's making me reflect on the inner experience of that, which is I feel like through my embodiment process, my body actually talks to me very quite literally, like shakes yes and no. Like it's really gives me super clear answers because this part of me gets confused about what to say and how to say it and when to say it. And what's been coming up for me lately. And you guys, I'm going to just be modeling transparency here.
Take your time.
I love you all so much. And it just hurts my heart what we're doing to each other. Because I don't want to hurt anybody with my words. But sometimes my body's telling me this is what needs to be said. And my mind is going, but that's going to hurt somebody's feelings. And there's just like this like kind of argument that I'm having with myself inside myself about what needs to be said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like part of it has to do with being a really sensitive empath, being able to pick up on so much going on in the space, and also having my training as a healer, being able to see under the surface, like you're talking about, to the truth of things, like the sort of factors that contribute to what's happening up here, and wanting to speak to this, but being misunderstood and knowing that people are going to misunderstand it. And it's like, how do I bring things with the level of fire my body wants to bring it with?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the part that I'm deconditioning some of the good girl. Like, I want to be a good girl and I want everyone to like me.
Thank you. I'm sure there are others in the field who can relate with you naming that conditioning. And I really want to appreciate the transparency and just vulnerability that you model in sharing your own process. This past weekend, I gave a public talk that's posted on my website now about courageous conversations and speaking from the heart, and just a few encouragements based on what you shared. It truly is my experience and belief that the more of us who are willing to learn, because it can take time to learn, how to include rather than disclude our fire energy, in what needs to be expressed, that by repressing it or pushing it away, we're actually undermining an energy that can be transformative and healing. For mindful speech, there are just some really basic things that are helpful, even with what you just said. So we notice where we ask first, does something need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Maybe, but maybe not. Does it need to be said by me right now? And maybe you get the feedback from your internal compass. No, actually, now's not the time. I'm not fully resourced. The person or audience isn't fully resourced. So no, I can let that go. But if all the things are yes, then how can I say whatever it is with respect, with kindness, from we consciousness rather than from I versus you consciousness? Now, a little caveat, I don't believe there's actually that much room for we consciousness on social media. Others will say they believe different, but I don't. It's my
I agree
experience.
with you. I don't think so.
It feeds binary perception because it's such a show up with kind of a short attention span thing. So I'm talking about in-person, heart-to-heart exchanges. But from that place, I trust the power of presence beyond everything, because individual presence is shared presence. It's dropping into the web of the relational field in a way that we are deeply attuned to each other. And difficult things can be said with respect and love. I've had so many opportunities in my life to get past what you said, sort of the good girl mentality I held in my early 20s, because from that. And as an example, many times people find they have to give and receive feedback that's difficult to another. So there's an art to learning to receive feedback. It's about humility and not taking personally, and also really holding ourselves in compassion. Then it's easy to receive feedback. We're learning. But also in giving feedback, it can be skillful to first say something that is affirming, equally true, but affirming. It's a way of being disarming, okay? Rather than, you know how defensive a relational field can get. And then speaking whatever it is in a way that invokes the other person's curiosity and inquiry, not saying like, this is from me to you, but more of a question to ask you or something to invite you to see if that feels so. I love giving and receiving feedback when it's conscious, because we really help each other learn. So there are tons of ways we could talk about courageous conversations. Sometimes it's about speaking up in a group. I'm in a group of activists, and I feel that there's something, everyone's holding the same perspective and I'm holding a different one that feels really important and is not going to be popular. I will start what I'm sharing saying, I'm aware that I feel nervous to presence this because I don't feel it's going to be popular. And I'm feeling uncomfortable in this field because there seems to be a momentum building about something that is leaving another perspective out. So here I go. And that always unifies the field. Do you know what I mean?
I love that. I love that communities where that is was received well, right? Because I do feel like there is certainly everybody tuning into that would even choose to tune into this podcast. You guys are people who are looking for this kind of community, looking for the kind of space where you can have dialogues like that and you can receive each other, and might be in systems where it seems very challenging to insert that, into a space that seems maybe not open to it. But what I'm hearing you say, what I'm feeling in your energy is go ahead and try, like find a
Oh,
way
yeah.
to presence that there's
Go
a different perspective.
because otherwise we are feeding the projection that projecting onto others that they are not open to it and that no one is open to it. One of the joys of my life is a 6-month training I guide online called The Heart of Listening on behalf of our collective. And we have people come from all walks of life, and people who are in leadership positions and people who work in the corporate world and people who are activists. And there is so much extraordinary experience of people bringing into environments where it seems like people only want to be in marketplace mentality together, or transactional relationships, or just feeding on consciousness. Everyone deep inside is starving, not hungry, folks, starving for deeper connection, starving for authenticity, starving for the invitation for us to set down the manuals that say there just has to be a tear of fabric in the field of human relationship. Let's put it down and be ourselves. And so when we offer that invitation to people, there's so many ways we can do it through listening as a committed embodiment. It's contagious. It's contagious. So yeah, the second book that I wrote is called Relational Mindfulness, and we work deeply within the communities I serve of what I would describe as relational mindfulness and relational presence, the field of communication, of conversation and engagement as a meditation practice and a liberation practice and a path of collective healing in itself. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's gorgeous. I feel like that goes deep enough to explain what you were talking about. We're either on this side with the gentleness, this side with the fierceness. It's the energy. What you're bringing all of that with is the energy of love and inclusiveness and compassion and understanding. And it's an active relationship in that moment. To frame it that way and to come from that energetic is the act of including everyone and not sort of doing the opposite experience, which many of us have had, right? Of like, oh, I'm just going to not talk to you. That's because that's not really an option anymore. We really don't, I don't feel we have that option anymore. I feel we must talk to each other. We must bridge these gaps. We must create safety so that some of this fear can relax and we can see each other clearly.
Thank you. So we can see each other clearly. And I hear you pointing beautifully to the inclusivity that we're called to in the field at large, human consciousness, and also within ourselves, including our whole selves. And back to luminous darkness for a moment, it's the healing of embracing the full spectrum of light and dark and the interplay of light and dark, the full spectrum. If we're not embracing that, then we are cutting off one half of our humanity and our human experience. One half, light and dark. We've been trained and conditioned to hold up light as higher than. And I just want to have people contemplate that for a moment. And even our globe today, even if we look at the overlighting of planet Earth, now I think the statistic is that about 90% of the US and Europe are artificially lit at night, and over 60% of the globe. And there are major impacts to this, people. Impacts to plants and animal species, impacts to humans, to our endocrine system and our circadian rhythms and all of that. This is big. So to really make note of our strange obsession with light over dark.
Yes. And embracing the totality of ourselves, being okay with everything that arises. And I hope I modeled some of that today. Just being transparent, being vulnerable. It's okay to be who you are in the moment, in the conversation. I love you guys. I want to just invite you to check out Eden's book, beautiful Luminous Darkness, an engaged Buddhist approach to embracing the unknown. You will not regret getting this book. You will be very delighted that you said yes to that invitation. And more links are down below in the show notes. Is there any last thing you want to give people before we head out?
I want to thank everyone for being here and thank your generous and transparent presence, and also let people know that there are all kinds of ways to drop into deeper experiences of this. So there are retreats offered on my website about luminous darkness or other topics in person, online. I'm here as a resource. So if you want to go deeper, simply reach out.
Beautiful. Okay, well, we always end every show with kisses. And so if you want to join me, you can send energetic kisses or whatever you want to do. I'm just going to send kisses to everybody. We love you so much. Thank you for staying tuned and being with us, being part of our community. We love you. See you next time on Soul Nectar Show. Bye for now, everyone.
If you found even one gold nugget in this episode of Soul Nectar Show, will you do us a favor? Will you subscribe, like, and share this episode? Maybe even write a comment and let us know what you thought about it. We really, really want to engage with you at a much deeper level. Let's be part of community together. Have a great week, everyone. Bye for now. To dive in deeper to nourishing conversation, visit soulnectar.show.
Soul Nectar Show. Awaken, awake to show. Take a sip from the drip of the nectar, from the source of who you are.